I still remember the sound my uncle made when the estate manager slid that envelope across the polished oak table. It wasn't a gasp. Not exactly. More like a soft choke, an involuntary noise a man makes when the world shifts under his feet. His face, usually smug and flushed with self-importance, went pale around the edges. His fingers twitched. And then he said the words he'd been saving like a dagger. "You're ungrateful, Margaret. After everything our family has done for you." Ungrateful. At 70 years old, I'd been called many things. But ungrateful? That was new. Especially coming from a man who had spent the last 3 months stripping my father's home, my home, like a vulture picking clean a carcass. He didn't know yet what was inside the envelope. He didn't know it would dismantle every assumption he had made about my father's estate, about my loyalty, and about what I supposedly owed him. But I knew. Because I had spent the past weeks preparing for this moment. Quietly. Methodically. Without raising my voice once. The estate manager, Mr. Rowe, cleared his throat. He was a careful man, mid-40s, slim, glasses perched low on his nose. The kind of man who respected documents more than people. Honestly, I appreciated that. People can lie. Documents rarely do. "Before we proceed," he said, "I need to state for the record that this envelope contains the final, legally verified will of the late Mr. Harold Atwood." My uncle stiffened. His name is Leonard, 62, booming voice, an ego that enters a room minutes before he does. For the past decade, he'd been telling anyone who would listen that he was my father's closest confidant. His right hand. His intended heir. He believed it. Absolutely. Until this moment. "Let's get on with it," Leonard snapped. "This entire process has been dragged out by her," he jabbed a finger in my direction. "Because she refuses to accept that Dad trusted me to handle things." Dad. He always called my father that. Never Harold. Never his brother. Always Dad, as if possession could be claimed through vocabulary alone. I didn't respond. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. I had spent a lifetime learning how to keep my composure in the face of his bluster. Mr. Rowe broke the seal. Silence thickened across the room. I watched as my uncle leaned forward, certain he was about to receive confirmation of everything he'd already bragged about to the neighbors, his bowling team, and the woman he was currently courting. But the moment the first line was read, his expression cracked. "This document states," Mr. Rowe began carefully, "that the entirety of Mr. Atwood's estate, including the house, the land, and all financial accounts, shall pass to his daughter Margaret Atwood." My uncle blinked. Once. Twice. "That's impossible," he muttered. But the will was real. The truth was real. And the downfall he had earned was already in motion. Little did he know. This was only the beginning of my quiet revenge. Because what he did before this meeting, that was the real betrayal. My name is Margaret Atwood, and I am 70 years old. I grew up in the same house my father built with his hands. Cedar beams, brick foundation, windows that caught the morning light in a way that made them glow like something alive. It was the house where he taught me how to mend a fence, how to balance a checkbook, and how to speak softly without surrendering my strength. My father, Harold, was a deliberate man. He rarely raised his voice. He believed measured words traveled farther than loud ones. I suppose I inherited that from him. I spent most of my adult life working as a librarian in our small New England town. It suited me. Quiet rooms, organized systems, the soft hum of lives unfolding through pages. Books taught me how to observe people before trusting them. How to document things. How to recognize patterns. Those skills would become more useful than I ever imagined. After I retired at 68, I moved back in with my father to help him through his final years. It wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. The kind of closing chapter life rarely writes elegantly. He passed peacefully in his sleep at 88. No drama. No lingering pain. Just a man who had lived well, loved deeply, and left this world with his affairs, supposedly, well in order. But grief has a way of pulling shadows out of people. And in the days after his death, I began noticing behaviors in my Uncle Leonard that unsettled me. Small things at first. A drawer left open. A document moved. Keys missing from a hook. I told myself it was grief. Confusion. Disorientation. But I knew better. Leonard and I had never been close. He had always been the brother who believed the world owed him something simply because he wanted it. He never worked steady jobs. He made excuses instead of savings. And his solution to every setback was to lean on my father. Over the years, Dad helped him. Loans, a place to stay when Leonard's third marriage collapsed, repairs for his car. But my father never mistook help for dependency. He expected effort in return. Leonard never gave any. Still, I didn't expect what came after the funeral. I didn't expect him to take advantage of the days when the house sat quiet and unsettled. I didn't expect him to show up unannounced with boxes, or to begin moving things out of my father's workshop before I even had the chance to breathe. And I certainly didn't expect him to start telling relatives, distant cousins, old friends, anyone who would listen, that my father had promised him control of the estate. At first, I said nothing. Silence can be a powerful teacher. But silence can also be mistaken for permission. And Leonard took it as exactly that. By the time I realized the extent of what he was doing, the damage was far worse than simple entitlement. Because hidden beneath his arrogance was something far more serious, a betrayal involving money that didn't belong to him, and a trail he never expected me to uncover. My family has always been small. My mother passed when I was 15, and it had been just my father and me ever since. Leonard, my uncle, drifted in and out like weather, unpredictable, disruptive, sometimes pleasant but usually inconvenient. But my father loved him. I never questioned that. Love, I've learned, isn't always rational. Sometimes it is simply habitual. Growing up, Leonard was the charming one. The storyteller. The man with grand plans that never materialized but always sounded convincing. He had a way of making my grandmother laugh, even when she was tired. A way of building elaborate dreams from fragments of speculation. But he also had another way about him, one more subtle, more corrosive. He stretched the truth like dough, pulling it just enough to hide the parts that didn't serve him. He borrowed money and forgot to repay. He made promises with no intention of keeping them. My father forgave him. I learned to step around him. But after Dad died, Leonard stepped into the silence like he had been waiting his entire life for it. In the weeks that followed the funeral, he became omnipresent, not out of grief, but out of opportunity. He arrived every morning before I woke, claiming he was organizing things. He sifted through drawers, boxes, cabinets, as if every corner held something he was entitled to. He told neighbors he was managing the estate. He told my father's old friends that Harold wanted him to take care of everything. He told relatives that I was too emotional to handle legal matters. All of it was said with that easy confidence of his, voice steady, eyes clear, expression softened with feigned concern. People believed him. And why wouldn't they? He sounded so sure. I sounded quiet. But I was not blind. I was watching. One afternoon, while sorting through my father's study, I found an empty envelope labeled Bond Certificates, 2004. The drawer where it used to sit looked disturbed. Papers pressed in the wrong order. Dust smudged. A faint scent of his cologne lingering where it shouldn't have been. A prickling sensation crept up my spine. Not fear. Recognition. I checked my father's ledger, the detailed record he kept of every financial asset. 3 bonds were missing. Missing. Or taken. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I observed. I watched how Leonard avoided eye contact whenever money was mentioned. How he changed the subject when the estate manager requested documentation. How he left the house early on days when certain mail arrived. And I watched how he began speaking to people about me. Softly, subtly, as though planting seeds. She's fragile. She's overwhelmed. She's grateful I'm stepping in. She knows Dad wanted me to help. Ungrateful. That word again. A word he used long before the will was ever opened. What I discovered next would finally prove what my instincts already knew. He wasn't just intrusive. He had crossed a line that could land him in serious legal trouble. The confirmation came on a Wednesday morning, tucked inside a plain envelope from a financial institution my father had used for decades. It was a routine account summary, nothing unusual on the surface. But as I read through the figures, something snapped into focus. 3 bonds had been cashed. Not redeemed through the estate. Not processed after my father's death. Cashed while he was still alive, just 6 weeks before he passed. My heart slowed. My breathing steadied. When I am most frightened, I grow calm. It is a habit built from decades of quiet resilience. I checked the signature authorization. A sloppy imitation of my father's handwriting. And a second signature that matched one I knew all too well. Leonard. Not the full name, never the full name. Just an initial and last name, written with the same careless confidence he had carried his whole life. He had stolen from my father. Not after his death, but before it. When Dad was too frail to notice changes in paperwork. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. It was intimate. It was a violation of trust between brothers that went deeper than any inheritance. I sat for a long time holding that paper, feeling an old ache rise in my chest. My father had believed people deserved second chances. Third ones, even. But this wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was calculated. Leonard had assumed he would inherit everything anyway. So why not take what he believed was already his? He underestimated me. He underestimated the paper trail. He underestimated the quiet daughter who learned from her father to document everything. Over the next week, I gathered evidence. Methodically. Privately. Without alerting him. Receipts, signatures, dates, account statements, witness accounts from financial clerks who remembered the transaction. The pieces formed a mosaic of betrayal. And while I collected proof, Leonard grew bolder. He started moving furniture out of the house. Tools from the shed. Books from my father's study. He claimed they were family assets, and he had every right. He told me repeatedly that I should be grateful for his help. That without him, I wouldn't know where to start. Ungrateful. Always that word. He wielded it like a weapon, as though gratitude equaled obedience. I remained calm. Because by then, I already had everything I needed. The will was still sealed. The estate manager was still uninformed. And Leonard was still telling everyone how the estate was basically his. He had no idea that the very thing he feared most, the real will, was about to collide head-on with the truth I had uncovered. And so I made the call to the estate manager. The call that would set everything into motion. I met with Mr. Rowe, the estate manager, 2 days later. We sat in his office, a quiet room lined with oak shelves and meticulously arranged files. He listened without interrupting as I presented the documents. Copies, never originals. When I finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This is serious, Mrs. Atwood." "Yes," I said softly. "I know." He wasn't shocked that Leonard had overstepped. Many people in town had long suspected he relied heavily on my father's generosity. What shocked him was the method, the forgery, the timing, the brazenness. He asked whether I wanted to press charges. It was a fair question. A tempting question. But revenge, for me, is not about destruction. It is about truth. Clarity. Accountability. "No," I said. "Not yet. Not unless he forces my hand. I want everything documented. I want the will opened with both of us present. And I want you to witness his reaction." Mr. Rowe nodded. We began assembling the official file, well organized, chronological, irrefutable. He contacted a probate lawyer who quietly joined our efforts. We cross-referenced dates, verified signatures, collected statements. Every sheet of paper strengthened the foundation of what would become Leonard's undoing. Meanwhile, I continued my measured silence at home. Leonard believed he was untouchable. He strutted through the house like a self-appointed executor. He held meetings at the kitchen table, spreading out papers that didn't belong to him. He nearly shouted when I requested receipts. He thought my calmness meant defeat. But it was preparation. One evening, I walked into the study and found him rifling through another drawer. He looked up, startled, then recovered quickly. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "Dad wanted me to handle things. You should be thanking me." I studied him for a moment. His face was flushed from whiskey. His movements sharp, restless. "I appreciate your concern," I replied. "Truly. But let's wait until the will is opened before making any assumptions." He scoffed. "There won't be any surprises, Margaret. Dad told me everything. But he was wrong. He knew nothing. And he had no idea we were days away from the meeting that would expose everything he had done." But the night before that meeting, Leonard made one last move, one that sealed his fate entirely. The night before the will reading, I walked into the dining room and found Leonard stuffing silverware, my mother's silverware, into a canvas tote bag. He didn't even hide it. He didn't even pretend. "They're family heirlooms," he said defensively when he saw my expression. "I'm taking what Dad meant for me to have." I felt something inside me settle. A quiet finality. Up until then, I had carried a small sliver of hope that, when confronted with the truth, he might show remorse. That perhaps grief had distorted his judgment. That somewhere beneath the entitlement was the brother my father once loved. But that hope evaporated as I watched him steal from our family in plain sight. "You'll need to bring those to the estate meeting tomorrow," I said. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You really don't get it, do you? I'm in charge here. And if you want to keep living in this house, you're going to show some gratitude." There it was again. Gratitude. As he defined it. I stood still, hands resting lightly on the back of a dining chair. "I'll be at the meeting at 11, I said quietly. "I expect you there on time." He waved me off. But something flickered in his eyes, an unease he tried to hide. He knew I was too calm. He knew I was too certain. And certainty from a quiet woman can be terrifying to a man who relies on bluster. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed the documents one final time. Everything was in order. Evidence, copies, dates, signatures. I wasn't just prepared, I was unshakable. I whispered to my father, something I had done often since his passing. "I'm not angry," I said softly. "Just ready." The next morning, Leonard arrived late, storming into the estate office like a man who expected applause. He sat across from me, smirking, confident. He had no idea the ground under him was already crumbling. And when the estate manager opened the will, everything he believed was about to collapse. When Mr. Rowe read the first lines of the will, leaving everything to me, Leonard exhaled sharply, as though the air had been punched from his lungs. "That's not right," he stammered. "Dad told me, he told me I would handle the estate." Mr. Rowe adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Atwood updated his will 3 years ago. It is legally binding." Leonard's eyes darted to me. "You manipulated him. You confused him in his old age. You—" "Stop," I said gently. "Just listen." I nodded to Mr. Rowe. He opened a second folder, the one containing the documents I had gathered. He placed each piece in front of Leonard, the financial statement, the forged signatures, the timeline. Precise. Undeniable. Leonard's bravado cracked. "What is this?" he whispered. "Evidence," Mr. Rowe said, "of unauthorized transactions made before Mr. Atwood's death. Documents we have verified." Leonard's hands trembled. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted weakly. "Dad would have wanted." "Dad didn't sign those papers," I said. My voice remained calm, but its steadiness cut through the room. And you know he didn't. He swallowed hard. Speech deserted him. Mr. Rowe continued, given the nature of the forgery and the amount taken, the estate has the right to pursue legal action. Leonard looked at me, horror blooming behind his eyes. You wouldn't, he said. We're family. Family. He invoked the word only when he needed protection. I'm not pressing charges, I replied. But you will return what you took. Every item. Every dollar. And you will not step foot in my father's house again. His mouth opened, but no words came. This is your chance to walk away quietly, I continued. Take it. For once in his life, Leonard was silent. That silence was his downfall. Not a dramatic collapse, not a chaotic confrontation. Just a man realizing he had overplayed every card he thought he held. He stood slowly, the weight of consequence settling heavily across his shoulders. I'll gather my things, he muttered. But there was nothing left for him to gather. Not after everything he had taken, and been forced to return. What followed his departure was not triumph, but something far more important. Peace. Leonard left that afternoon. No shouting. No accusations. No threats. Just the defeated shuffle of a man who finally understood that entitlement is not inheritance. When the door closed behind him, the house exhaled. And so did I. For the first time since my father's passing, the rooms felt still in a way that wasn't suffocating. I wandered through each space, the study, the workshop, the garden, touching the places he built, the places he loved. I wasn't celebrating Leonard's downfall. Revenge, for me, is never about victory. It is about restoration. About setting things back into balance. In the weeks that followed, I focused on stabilizing the estate. I worked with the lawyer to ensure every account was properly transferred. I reorganized the shelves my uncle had disturbed. I repaired the door he'd slammed too many times. And I grieved. Properly this time. Without the noise of intrusion. Without the shadow of betrayal. Sometimes, in the quiet of late evening, I would sit on the porch and speak to my father in the soft way I used to. I handled it, I whispered once. Not with anger. Just clarity. The way you taught me. And in the wind that filtered through the pines, I felt something like approval. Leonard's departure had ripples through the family, of course. Some relatives were stunned. Others admitted they had always suspected he would overstep. But no one defended him. No one questioned my choices. The truth had been documented too clearly for debate. As for me, I felt lighter. Not triumphant. Not vindictive. Simply free. And yet, there was one final thing I wanted to share. One final truth that completes this story. If there is one thing my father taught me, it is this. Quiet people are not weak. And calm people are not passive. Silence, when chosen rather than forced, is a form of power. My uncle believed gratitude meant obedience. He believed love came with conditions. He believed inheritance was something he deserved simply by being present enough to reach for it. But gratitude is not owed, it is earned. Love is not leverage. It is responsibility. And inheritance is not a prize. It is a legacy entrusted to those who honor it. I chose not to destroy Leonard, though I had every legal right. I chose documentation over confrontation. Evidence over emotion. Dignity over spectacle. Because true revenge, the kind that restores rather than ruins, is quiet. It is the moment truth stands unshakable while lies collapse under their own weight. And so, if you are listening to this story because you too have faced betrayal, remember this. You do not need to shout to be heard. You do not need to fight brutally to fight effectively. You do not need to become cruel to protect what is yours. Stand firm. Gather your evidence. Know your worth. And let the truth do the heavy lifting. That is the lesson my father left me. And now, I leave it with you.